May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. It is said that Eleanor Roosevelt wrote, "Do something that scares you every day." Another writer, Mary Schmitz, actually is the one who put it that way: do one thing every day that scares you. But the former First Lady actually did say, you must do the thing you think you cannot do. And the transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in 1841, always do what you're afraid to do. When so many of us watched the multi-part documentary series about the Roosevelts by Ken Burns on public television this past fall, it was clear that Eleanor Roosevelt did, in fact, live into her fears every day, and thus charted one of the most distinguished courses of the 20th century by anyone. She redefined the role of the First Lady, including being a champion of those who were marginalized and discriminated against. She was also the guiding force not only for the establishment of the United Nations, but also for writing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. After her husband's death, she incarnated the four freedoms he had articulated in his 1941 inauguration speech: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. My point is that all these people and many others are in agreement with the central point of the parable assigned for you and me to savor today. And that is, when you and I live our lives based in fear, we simply cannot live a life that flourishes, that grows and evolves, that was intended for us to live, and that can make a contribution to the common good and to history. Now, for those of you who have been members of this church for a while and have heard me preach 4 million sermons on fear, and you're going to hear another one, it's because the whole of the Bible agrees on very few things, but one of the things that the whole Bible agrees on is that there is a certain kind of fear that is the enemy of human life. In the Bible, the commandment, do not fear, appears 365 times, I'm told. Do not fear, or do not be afraid, or some kind of caution about fear. So you have to hear a lot of sermons about this. And you need a lot of sermons about this. Now, in this morning's parable, the talents, or 6,000 to 30,000 silver coins, were distributed to 3 different people. Talents in Jesus' time were a form of measuring out gold or silver, and also in our parlance, it is a metaphor for referring to all sorts of personality and skill, gifts, and propensities. And fear is the dynamic that keeps the one out of the 3 persons who was given some talents, and in his case, he was given 1 talent, the 6,000 silver coins. Fear kept this person from trading and cultivating the talent he was given. And then when he has to give an accounting of what he did with the 1 talent he was given, he said the following: I was afraid, I dug a hole and hid it. This behavior of hiding the talent to protect it from theft seems to you and me like a kind of a safe thing to do, right? But Jesus' parable treats it as a bad thing, which is a reversal of the listener's expectation. Apparently, one of the rules of life for Jesus is not to play it safe. One of Jesus' rules of life is that fear leads to hiding. Fear leads to playing it safe rather than risking and increasing the value and vitality of our lives. I assume that Jesus was a good Jew. Some called him rabbi. He knew the Jewish scriptures. He knew the Genesis story. He knew Genesis chapter 3, a story where fear and hiding appears. And I assume that Jesus had that story in the back of his mind when he told this story. You remember the story. God decided to go out and walk in the cool of the day in the original garden. Decided he would love to have happy hour with Adam. Called out an invitation, Adam, where are you? And Adam was afraid, and according to the story, hid his self, which is an interesting way to look at it. The certain kind of fear that is our enemy is the fear that leads us to hide. When you're afraid, you hide yourself. When you're afraid, you hide your talents. And because I don't ever want to ignore neuroscience, when you fear, you hide your prefrontal cortex, which is this innovative part of your brain here. You hide blood flow from it. When you and I are afraid, the blood flow leaves our mammalian brain. Our mammalian brain is where we have the functions of being able to play and exercise compassion and care for our young as other mammals do. But the blood not only leaves our mammalian brain, it leaves our prefrontal cortex, where the human abilities reside for creativity and problem solving and innovation. And the blood all goes down to our primitive brain down here, or our reptilian brain, where the only functions we have are not thinking, but choosing fight, flight, or freeze. And what Jesus is calling you and me to in his rule of life, which he wants us to have as our rule of life, is rather than fearing, to risk, to dare, to not fear. Gordon Cosby, the founder of the Washington, D.C. Church of the Savior, wrote, "Besides distorting our perspective, fear is not a very comfortable place to live. When I reflect deeply on my life and what I really want, it's not to be afraid. When I'm afraid, I'm miserable," Cosby said. "I play it safe. I restrict myself. I hide the talent of me in the ground. I'm not deeply alive. The depths of me are not being expressed." I commend to you all the writings of John O'Donohue, the Irish poet who wrote several transformative books like Anam Cara and To Bless the Space Between Us, a book of blessings. In that latter book, O'Donohue expresses at many moments throughout the book the importance of dealing with fear by living a life of courage and living a life of risk-taking in the service of living the life of your dreams. The words, you could search his book like you would search a concordance. The words fear, courage, risk, and dreams occur over and over and over again in his writings. For instance, in the beginning of the book, he has a prayer for the morning called a morning offering. He prays, "May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more." Waste my heart on fear no more. O'Donohue has a prayer for the end of the day, which is really an examination of all the things that we did or didn't do that day. And one of the questions he suggests we ask about the day that is passing is, where could I have exposed myself to the risk of something different? The paragraph that I think summarizes so much of what O'Donohue was about, I wonder if this is not his central passion paragraph, is this: "It remains the dream of every life to realize itself, to reach out and lift oneself up to greater heights. A life that continues to remain on the safe side of its own habits and repetitions, that life that never engages with the risk of its own possibility, that remains an unlived life. There is within each heart a hidden voice that calls out for freedom and creativity. We often linger for years in spaces that are too small and too shabby for the grandeur of our spirit. Yet experience always remains faithful to us. If lived truthfully and generously, experience will always guide us toward the real pastures." And so I close with excerpts from another one of his prayers, blessings poems called For Courage. He begins by noting that when your whole heart is raven dark, what a poetic way to describe depression and fear. When your whole heart is raven dark, because fear has turned your body cold as a stone inside. Then, to pick up his poetry, steady yourself and see that it is your own thinking that darkens your world. Now, before I go on, to quote his poetic solution to a fear that turns you cold, let me just give a bow to some other research that I decided has to go into my next sermon on fear. There's so much really great neuroscientific research going on about fear in the brain, and I did not know this, but of all the mental illnesses that afflict Americans, anxiety is the biggest. And that doesn't even touch all the rest of us who are just everyday common worriers. But this article talked about how oftentimes we are born with a propensity to fear, and that depends on what kind of community you live in. I'm talking to you newcomers who are about to join All Saints. What kind of community you live in about whether or not you can get a leg up on your fear. And how important it is, another writer, Paul Krugman, talks about how important it is these days for us to really figure out this thing about fear, because you could introduce a garden snake right here and I would just go wild, crazy, fearful. And at the same time, I know that because of the climate crisis, millions and millions and millions of people are going to die, and my life and our lives are going to be really, really uncomfortable, and I don't have the fear about that I have as a common garden snake. We got to do something about our fear and figuring out what makes us afraid. John O'Donohue says, here's one thing we have to do. Search your life, and you will find a diamond thought of light. Know that you are not alone, and the darkness you are experiencing has a purpose. And gradually the darkness will school your eyes to find the one gift your life requires hidden within this night corner you're experiencing. Invoke the learning of every suffering you have ever suffered. Close your eyes. Gather all the kindling about your heart to create one spark. That's all you need to nourish the flame that will cleanse the dark of its weight of festered fear. A new confidence will come alive in you to urge you toward higher ground where your imagination will learn to engage difficulty as its most rewarding threshold. Imagine your imagination retraining your life so that every time you have difficulty, you engage it as your life's most rewarding threshold to something new and grand in grandeur. My friends, I think Jesus is asking All Saints Church Pasadena and everybody else who's streaming in with us, and all of you folks who are joining All Saints as new members today, and the two of you who are about to be baptized. Jesus is asking us in this morning's parable to learn to engage difficulty as our most rewarding threshold, to see what others might see as fear-producing, as not fear-producing, but a great moment knocking on the door of our heart and our life. Jesus is calling us to redefine fear, not as a call to dig a hole and hide, but as a motivator. We can retrain ourselves with a new story to say, there is an occasion that is tempting me to be afraid and to hide. But God, with your help, oh divine love, with your help, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and see the grace and glory waiting to be realized in this very scary issue. You see, my friends, fear is not our true self. Our true self is fear's opposite, love. And when you and I have an experience along our journey to realize that love itself is living in us and through us. We were made by love. We were made through love. We have love existing within us. That's exactly how we plug into a much larger mind and heart beyond our own, and we begin to find solutions and innovations, not just for our own selfish, separate self, but for the whole human community. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love. To postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more.